That sounds pretty reassuring. I'm just curious because you just did sort of make a correlation between the personality of a child and their sleeping habits. Are there any more, I don't know if it's backed up by research or just theories about how a child develops in terms of how they sleep?
It's an area that nobody studies because it's a very personal decision how we parent. Something like 40% of children in the US don't have a secure attachment. That means there's not one adult that they are connected to that level. We're not saying that attachment style parenting, is perfect parenting, but we do know that connection is enhanced by sharing a sleep space, by full-term breastfeeding, by baby wearing. It's something that humans have always done, and humans still are in the majority of the world. They say in Africa the babies don't cry because there's always somebody right there to attend to their needs. The less distressed babies are, the less cortisol they're releasing. We know with research into controlled crying that the baby may stop crying. And the mother has a decrease in her stress hormone when the baby stops crying. The baby continues to have raised cortisol levels. We don't know the ongoing impact of that. We don't know if we're seeing the results of some of that style of parenting in behaviour problems in children, in anxiety or depression in adults, because nobody's doing the research. But it's certainly not a big leap to think that children who have been encouraged to disconnect from their parents in infancy are going to struggle with connection later in life.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a bit of common sense there to make that connection. I'm just curious, what, I guess, sparked your passion for natural parenting, for attachment parenting, for co-sleeping and breastfeeding and baby wearing?
It's pretty easy. I had 3 children. I read all the books when I was pregnant with the first one, so I knew how it all works, and I was very confident that it was quite straightforward. Then I had a baby. And to start with, I was trying to do it the way that I'd been told you should do it, that you would feed the baby and put the baby back to bed, and that feeds would be fairly predictable in their timing, and the baby would spend a lot of time sleeping, giving me time to knit all my own clothes and cook all our food and write a book and all those other things. But I had real children, and I worked out fairly soon, thankfully, with the first child, that there was a different way of doing this. And progressively, as I had my children, I guess I became more and more aware. Dr. William Sears wrote a lot of books in the 1980s which made sense to me and which were in line with how I was parenting. So I've always been passionate about breastfeeding, co-sleeping, baby wearing. My passion has been reignited since my first grandchild came along 4.5 years ago. And she's been joined, she's got a 14-month-old sister now. And my daughter was raised this way, and she's now raising her babies that way. And I think I've got 3 pretty great adult children and 2 really great grandchildren. And watching my granddaughters play at parenting using this same approach shows me that we can change the way we do things within a family culture, and that normalises it for our children as they grow. So my daughter grew up expecting to breastfeed her babies, to share sleep with them, to carry them. And that was her normal, and that became the children's normal.
Yep. Breastfeeding. Can you just expand a little bit more on your thoughts about that?
Breastfeeding is something that became very important to me. Like most mothers, I didn't have an easy journey into breastfeeding, particularly with my first child. And when you have problems, you tend to learn as much as you can about something. So over the years, I've learned how important breastfeeding is to our long-term health, to our planet's health. I think globally, but I act locally, so I'm passionate about supporting women to meet their own breastfeeding goals. How long each of us breastfeeds our babies is up to us. It's not a competition. There's no minimum amount of breastfeeding to count. But I'm passionate about the World Health Organization guidelines to exclusively breastfeed for around 6 months. We have a history of introducing solids too soon, too much, which is very likely associated with a lot of the allergies and other problems that we're seeing today. And that continued breastfeeding is important for 2 years or beyond. Breastfeeding is not a short-term thing that we do to a baby. It's a relationship that we have with a child. It's much more than just a food. It's important for our immune system to minimise exposure to foreign foods. It protects our gut health to be breastfed exclusively, if possible. My first child wasn't breastfed exclusively. She was given formula in hospital without my knowledge or consent.
Okay.
We've had changes since then. You now need to consent, which is good, but there's a lot of pressure put on you to consent, so it's not necessarily an informed choice. Breast milk is a food for children and continues to be once solids have been introduced. We don't need to be in a rush to displace breast milk from a child's diet. Ideally, we are breastfeeding them until they mature to a point developmentally where they don't need to breastfeed. And all children will wean, and most of them will wean somewhere around 2 to 4 years. Around the world, it's typical to breastfeed for as long as 8 years. So our infant feeding guidelines recommend at least 12 months. We can do better than that. We don't want to give our children a bare minimum. We want to give them maximum potential. So if we can breastfeed for at least 2 years and allow the child to wean naturally, we're really setting them up for a good relationship and better health.
I'm wondering a little bit, I'm wondering about what you've mentioned about how breastfeeding is good for our health and for the planet. I'm not sure if you have any sort of like figures or anything sort of to bring to the table, but are you able to go in a bit more depth about how this actually works?
A lot of people talk about the pressure to breastfeed, and particularly women who have not been able to breastfeed, who wanted to, and they've encountered problems that have been insurmountable for them. And they often have the impression that they are the minority, that everyone else is breastfeeding, and they're very sensitive. The reality is, in Australia, only 15% of babies are exclusively breastfed to 6 months. 5% are breastfed at 2 years. So 95% of Australian children are not meeting that World Health Organization minimum. I'd like to point out all the countries that are meeting that minimum. There aren't any.
Okay.
So this is not exclusive to Australia. This is a global issue. Some countries are doing a lot better than others, which shows us it's not about the individual's ability to breastfeed. A woman's body will breastfeed depending on what country they live in. Makes no sense. Norwegian breasts do not work better than American breasts. These people live very similar lifestyles and have dramatically different breastfeeding rates. Ireland has one of the lowest breastfeeding rates in the world, lower than the UK. Now, those people, again, are living very similar lifestyles. So we have to ask what's different. It's not about what's happening with the body, it's what's happening with the society. Where is the support for the woman? Where is the support for breastfeeding at a community level? And what is happening with the marketing of formula? Because every woman that doesn't breastfeed is a customer for formula companies. So it's in their interest to make their products known, to have great brand awareness of their product, and in many countries they are very, very aggressive about that marketing. We're very protected in Australia. We haven't signed to agree to the WHO code on marketing of breast milk substitutes, but we have an Australian agreement where most of the manufacturers have signed that. In America, it's considered to be against their rights to enable the WHO code. So you get to see the marketing in its worst possible manner. If you go into a maternity store in your early pregnancy and sign up for their loyalty card, they will sell your details to formula companies and you will begin receiving samples or full-size tins of formula, possibly before you've announced your pregnancy to your family. And they will continue turning up on your doorstep in increasing numbers up until the time you have your baby and before you return home from hospital with your baby. And they continue to come at every turn that you go on your breastfeeding journey. There will be people selling you formula as a solution to your breastfeeding problems. And that's what we're trying to avoid. People need to make choices, but not choices based on how well marketed a product is. These should be health choices, not consumer choices.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm just curious about as well, because we've talked about co-sleeping and a little bit about breastfeeding, and I was just thinking maybe we could just talk a little bit about baby wearing as well, because it sort of ties in all together. And this is also something, one of your values in the Southern Natural Parenting Group. Can you tell us a little bit about baby wearing and the benefits?
The three are absolutely interconnected, and you will find that people that do all three of them tend to be, I guess, more connected to their child. Dr. Jack Newman has posted some really good stuff about this, and basically since the beginning of time humans have breastfed their babies, slept beside their babies and carried their babies. Human brains take a lot of development. You can't have great intelligence without great time to develop that. It's crucial for our babies to be carried. In our traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyles, you couldn't just lay the baby in the cot and then walk a few kilometres to collect food. Nomadic societies would move on regularly. The babies couldn't get up and walk like other mammals might. So we have to carry our babies. We also have to use our hands. So, you know, the first woman that invented a baby carrier must have been a great celebrity in her community, because it was literally, look mum, no hands. So it's a